Welcome back to the Data Science Hangout, everybody. If we haven't met, I'm Libby. I'm a data community manager here at Posit, and I host the Data Science Hangout based in San Antonio. If you're not familiar with Posit, Posit builds enterprise solutions and open source tools for people who do data science with R and Python, like me. And we're also the company formerly known as RStudio. So if you've used RStudio, you've used Posit. I am joined by the creator of the Hangout and my co-host, Rachel. Rachel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. I'll be hanging out here in the background in the chat and helping with logistics while Libby is the main host today. But so nice to see all of you.
Thank you. And Rachel's in Boston, covering the East Coast, if anyone's in Boston. So the
I'm
Hangout is,
actually at the Posit office today, if anybody's in the Seaport area.
oh, nice. I can always tell when you're at the office because you have the background with a little Posit poster in the background. Well, if you have not been to the Hangout before, welcome. We're so glad you're here. The Hangout is our open space to see what's going on in the world of data across all of our different industries, to chat about data science leadership, to connect with other people who are sort of facing the same things that we are. And we get together here on Thursday, same time, same place every week. Well, mostly every week. Sometimes it's Thanksgiving. If you're watching this on YouTube, by the way, and you want to join us in the future in person, there's going to be details in the description box below to add it to your calendar. Just a note, if you are adding it to your calendar, please make sure that it adds for 12 p.m. Eastern US time. We've had some problems with it adding an hour later for people who maybe are using a laptop that possibly travels with them. Okay, I want to say thank you to everybody, first of all, who has made this the friendly and welcoming space that it is today. We're all dedicated to keeping it that way. So if you have feedback about your experience today, good or bad, we really want to hear from you. And it's super easy to let us know because a survey is going to pop up straight from Zoom into your browser the moment that you close this meeting. You can always find Rachel or I on LinkedIn or Blue Sky as well. I'm the only Libby Heron on Blue Sky and LinkedIn, so I'm very easy to find. At the Hangout, we really love hearing from you live. It doesn't matter what your years of experience are, or your title, or your industry, or what languages you use or you don't use. We would love you to participate today because this is a community-driven discussion. If you don't ask questions, the discussion doesn't happen. We also really encourage you to connect with each other in the chat. The chat is your space to hang out and have a party. So introduce yourself. Where are you? What do you do? What do you do for fun? And then also please share your LinkedIn profile so people can connect with you or your website. Also, if you're looking for a role, please let people know what you're looking for and where you are. And if you have a role that you are hiring for or that you know about, please share it so we can connect our community members with open opportunities that fit them. All right, with that, let me tell you how to participate. So there are 3 ways to jump in and ask questions. You can always raise your hand on Zoom. We will call you to jump in. It's great if when you raise your hand on Zoom, if you have your camera on so we can see who you are and we know who you are. If you can also put a question in the chat for us, we can just ask you to hop in live and ask it yourself. If you can't ask it, maybe your camera or your mic doesn't work or you're somewhere loud, like Krista said that she's got construction going on, we can ask it for you. Just let us know in your question by putting a little asterisk somewhere in there. And then if you would like to ask questions anonymously, we also have a Slido link. Isabella just put that in the chat for us. You can always ask questions there, and we always get lots of wonderful questions anonymously, and we appreciate it. Okay, 2 more housekeeping things, and I will introduce our wonderful co-host today. Registration for PositConf is open, but also the call for speakers for PositConf closes tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. So get your proposals in. It's just a 60-second clip of you talking about what it is. It's really easy to do. I promise it's not that scary. You can do it. All right, I'm so excited to be joined by our co-host today, Mrinal Raghupathi, data scientist at YouTube. Mrinal, it's so nice to have you. I would love for you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then also what you do for fun.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. I really love these things where I get to chat with people. I would absolutely encourage people to ask questions. I love talking. That's both a blessing and a curse in my role. So feel free to shout out questions. I'm Renal. I work at YouTube on the data science team. I've been there for about 4 years, and I'm currently what they call a tech lead, which means I manage data science work and projects and initiatives, but I don't manage people. So I used to actually be a people manager. I used to be a data science manager. I did that for a while also at YouTube. Prior to that, I worked at BlackRock, which is an investment management firm, where I did a mix of quant and data science and actually some sort of software engineering type stuff. And prior to that, actually, maybe you mentioned San Antonio. I used to live in San Antonio. I worked for a company called USAA. And I was also there for like 4 years. And there again, I did a mix of like quant and investments and model related stuff. I can tell people whatever they like. And prior to that, I was a academic. So I also have done that. So I've done like a variety of things. I try to then tell people there's some structure to it. And I like look back and I make it sound like it was planned that way. That's what I do. And then for fun, what do I do for fun? I hang out with my kids. That's fun. And I take up hobbies every year. So for example, this year's fun hobby is 3D printing. So that's what I'm doing right now for fun. And then the other like long-lasting hobby of mine has actually been I love building Lego and doing things with Lego. So I do like all things Lego. I do like digital Lego and I do like my own Lego and I do like sets and I buy and sell Lego. Like I do all kinds of Lego stuff. That's like a big thing.
Nice. I think you're going to find a lot of kindred spirits here, not only with the Lego, but with the 3D printing. I can already see people on this call that I know do 3D printing. So y'all hop in the chat and talk about it. I would love it if you could help us out with a little bit of an example of the types of things that your team tackles as far as data challenges. What problems do you solve? What type of data do you use? Because we come from all different industries and it might help us develop some context and help us ask questions.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. So I'll actually talk about it in a slightly broader context than just my current role because I feel like there's a lot of different things I've messed around with. So for example, right now I think a large amount of what we do, and I think this is true generally of like tech versus finance, is we spend a lot of time looking at user activity and user behavior, right? Like a lot of big tech firms, YouTube, Google, Facebook, all of these firms, we have a lot of users. And so I think the broad categories I would break that down into is there's a lot of need to just understand, right? There's just like, let's just do I call it like EDA on steroids, right? Let's just understand what's happening. And I think one of the things I kind of tell people is like, this is like the ultimate, there's like a data science dilemma that happens all the time, which is like, you are in a job where you complain about how much you don't have enough data. You're like, oh my, I wish I had more data. And then like you're in a job where you have like too much data. You're like, oh my God, there's so much data. So there's always this like tension between too much and too little. And I think one of the patterns I would say is like we spend a lot of time, I think, uh, making sense of really, really large data sets in a variety of ways, right? Either through really good EDA, actually making good charts and like aggregating data is like a skill that I think is really valuable. And then we spend a lot of time doing, I think, a blend of sort of experiment analysis. There's big tech firms run experiments and causal inference, right? So you often want to understand whether this is just a correlation or there's actually some causation to it. And then sort of going back a little bit further, like in finance, I think it's very much about understanding what's going on in markets versus it's like people versus markets, right? There's a lot about like understanding what's going on in markets. You don't get to run experiments. You have to basically rely on observational data. You have to like sort of wonder like, did this event actually cause the market to move or was it something else? You try to understand risk and you tend to build like risk models and you tend to sort of think about that. But again, the common thing there is you often just have a lot of data, a lot of market data, and you kind of make sense of it. So there's sort of, again, a lot of EDA on steroids that I've seen there. I think that's sort of been the general theme. The thing I do not do, or maybe the thing I do not do is I don't do a lot of like ML engineering type, let's build like a deep neural network kind of data science, which is another flavor of data science. I've dabbled in it. I dabble in it occasionally, but as part of my role, I don't really do that.
Well, speaking of dabbling in things, I love math, but I didn't get to do math in college. You did pure math, a PhD in pure math. I'm curious about how your transition from PhD in pure math in Texas um, happened to data science. Can you talk a little bit about that?
This is the part where I'm going to make it sound like there was a lot of um, deep thought and planning, and it's actually probably all correlations. So I started, as you said, as a very, very, very like the purest of pure mathematicians. In fact, so pure that I even wrote a book in pure math. Like that's how extreme it was. And I think it was over time, I think I just sort of happened to run into people. And I think this is a big part of of my experience has been like, you just sort of run into people who sort of just help you think about things, help you think differently. They sort of they shape like your view of the world. And so I was like down this like very pure math path, and I'm like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And I happened to run into sort of just a couple of folks. First at Vanderbilt during my postdoc, who were pure math folks who were sort of doing more applied math. And I was like, going to their seminars and just seeing what they're doing. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool stuff. And they're doing sort of signal processing and things, which is again a form of data science and a form of data analysis. And you can see applications. And then there was sort of work being done around like compressed sensing. So there was just like these applications of the things I knew. And that sort of opened my eyes to like, oh, this stuff, you know, the pure stuff when applied is like really cool. And then I ended in in an office next to a colleague of mine who was very into topic modeling at that time and sort of that kind of like machine learning and data science. And we just started talking, right? And I think this is where like I really emphasize to folks that I meet, like data science is not about data; it's about the people. It's actually not a profession about data; it's a profession about people. And we started talking, and I got interested in like this stuff, and I was like, this clustering stuff is so cool, and then I started learning some tools, and I was fiddling around with pandas, like early versions of pandas and early versions of these things, and just like messing around. I just got into it. I was like, could this just be my job, right? Like, could I just do this instead? And that's how I sort of ended up as a data scientist. And then I think you just sort of take the shortest or the most convenient path you can to get your goal. And so I was working at the Naval Academy in the math department. And so you can sort of see like military, then go to USA, which was a company, but very focused on the military. And then I was like, what kind of quant do I want it to be? Let me grow up a little bit. And I was like, I kind of wanted to do investing. And so within USA, I kind of went to the investment part of USA. And then I was like, oh, this is really cool. I really like investing and data. And then I went to BlackRock. And so that's how I ended up with BlackRock. And then at BlackRock, I kind of learned, I really like the technology, and I like the data management, and I like sifting through the data a lot. And I want to do that at bigger scale. So I was like a big tech company. So that's kind of how I ended up on this journey. I actually
Great.
had no idea when I started. I was like, let's just go that way. Like I didn't know I was going to be a data scientist. I was like, I'll just go that way and see what happens.
No, I didn't know that I was going to be either. And I started as a finance major, personal finance major, and kind of wandered around until I took a stats class and I was like, oh, wait, no, this is what I want to do. I want to do stats and I want to use computers. Um, Thank you for sharing that. I really was kind of wondering if you use any pure math in your day-to-day job, but it sounds like the shift, even though it's pretty big, has been really beneficial for you. And this kind of ties into Mike's question. Mike, I saw you had a question in the chat, which is about management. Are you available to ask that?
Sure. So it was interesting to hear that you've said that you've done both people management and now tech lead. One question was kind of, if you could give advice to younger you who's a people manager or just about to become a people manager, what would you tell? What would you say? and would you say, yeah, go do the people management because it's a great thing and you'll learn lots about dealing with people? Or would you say, don't do it, become the technical lead?
If I could, it's a great question. If I could go back and give my younger self some advice, uh, I would say the advice I give myself is wait as long as you can to be a people manager. I think being a people manager was actually a very good experience. I really enjoy being a people manager. I tell people I like the people part of it. I didn't like the management part of it as much, but right, like there's a sort of a bureaucratic overhead to being a manager, and after all, you just like I just don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, I hated being a manager. Not working with people.
And I think in all the roles I was in, I think it was a sort of a natural thing where people would tell you like, hey, your career progress is very much about like moving from, being an individual contributor to being a people manager. And these two things are very like disjoint. And so you say, oh, well, okay, that's what I got to do. That's the step. So I think if I could really go back, I would say like, hey, like figure out how you can make this individual role in any form work for as long as you can, and figure out how to do the people part of it more and more without doing the management. So mentoring, collaborating on projects, working across like a larger organization is like stakeholders. Like there's all these ways you can experience that aspect of like working with people and sort of interacting with people and like well, even you can do all of that stuff without actually having to do the formal management. That's the advice, one piece of advice I'd give myself. I guess the other way of putting it is like, don't be in a rush, right? Like, don't just be like, the path forward as a data scientist is up this ladder, which involves write code, manage, right? I would say like I've actually, this is the first time, sort of a weird thing in the career, but maybe this is actually the only time I have been an individual contributor in that sense, and not on a people managing path, which is a really like nice thing. In every other role, like I went into the role kind of, it was like already sort of in the role description that the role will begin as a IC, but it will expand to be a team. And I knew it was in my future. So I think that's the big shift in my case. And I've actually enjoyed it a lot. I've enjoyed just doing my own thing.
That sounds really, really nice. Mike, any follow-ups there?
Well, yeah, I completely echo that sentiment of not rushing into it, because I think if you rush into being a manager too soon, then often you wind up being not a very effective manager, right? Whereas I think if you can get that experience, just as you're saying, get the experience, learn about a lot of things, including yourself, then you can be a much more effective manager when it comes. So, yeah.
I also feel like I think there's an aspect of this which is this maybe goes a little bit back to like this notion I have of like the flavors of data science. Is data scientists are a very varied bunch of people. It is actually quite hard to say go manage 27 data scientists or 50. Like in many organizations, like it works in some places, but it's actually sort of, I think it sort of puts an emphasis a little bit on the fact that it's sort of similar and like the sort of variety of data science, and actually data science problems themselves are like all sort of unique and special. Actually, this is a thing like in general, like data scientists at lots of places. Like if I go back and give myself advice, as a younger me, I'd be like, hey, like, are you really all the same? Like, is there a way to sort of operate in a way like where, you sort of recognize that maybe people are like actually better off just doing their own thing in some way? And there's different ways to think about this. So I think that variety is definitely, it's a cool thing. It just sometimes makes like scaling management kind of tricky.
Yeah. I can't imagine being asked to manage 20 people. I can't imagine being asked to manage 2 people. I think that would be really daunting. Alan, I saw in the chat you had less of a question and more of just like additional thoughts, and I would love if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I think Zoom was just telling me something weird. Okay.
Uh-oh.
It's turned off reactions, whatever that means. Yeah, I
Okay.
think I was just reflecting on not that I disagree, Mrinal, but the sort of stay in the technical side, stay in the individual contributor side versus jumping into people leadership. I think a lot of organizations, maybe too many organizations, don't know how to design a career path that doesn't lead into people leadership. And so I think I'm just sort of reflecting on that dilemma of, I'm not sure if it's a problem of scale or if it's a problem of like variety within the organization, but I think it's really hard to make a team that doesn't progress in that direction. And I'm thinking about it from the perspective of how do I develop the folks that I lead and what kind of paths do they want to be on? One of the constant questions to me is like, what's my succession plan? Well, maybe I don't want to develop the people I lead into my role. Maybe it's not what they want. So like really cognizant of that kind of dilemma. And so maybe to try to make it into a question, have you seen things that help to make that path possible to become increasingly technical and maybe increasingly technical in a strategic way, without needing to inherit all of the things that come along with leading people who are doing that work?
I will. I think it's a really, really great point. So I've seen and I've had a couple of thoughts on this. So I think one aspect of this is if you're at a very large company, and by the way, like if you just go back through my initial like ramble of like what I said, you'll realize like my experience is I worked at DoD, I worked at USA, it's like 30,000. Like you can see like it's a cross section of like big organizations. And so I think in large organizations, you can sort of put people a little bit on the path of you as an individual figure out a way to scale sort of your scope and remit. And I think I've always felt like stakeholders of mine, so portfolio managers or engineers, have much clearer defined paths. They're able to say things like, portfolio manager, you just want to manage money and you want to move up, manage more and more money. Right? Like it's sort of, I'm sort of oversimplifying, but I think they have a very clear, like quantifiable thing. On the engineering side, I think the version I've seen of this is you just manage a larger and larger system or a larger and larger problem or larger and larger technical thing. I feel like data scientists, our equivalent version of that is because going back to like, I feel like we're really about the people and the data. It's not manage more data or like make your data bigger. It's actually, I think, trying to figure out like, can you actually manage a larger organization? Can you actually like work on a more strategic problem, like you said? And I think that's again going back to like sort of the uniqueness of data science. I feel like almost every group or every company has to like work this out for them, almost for themselves, which is like a really bad answer. But I feel like it's sort of it really often boils down to like creating that like scope around like the organization you're willing to like influence or work with, or the sort of the complexity of the technical problem you're willing to work on. The flip side of that is it's quite challenging for the person themselves, right? So it's also challenging for the person who says, I don't want to go down this path of manager, to then say like, hey, we're going to put you on a slightly untrodden path. And we're going to like have you figure it out a little bit. And one of the things I think I've talked to a couple of people, like you sort of have to give up a little bit is, someone said this to me really well. They said they were an engineer and they had a colleague who was not an engineer. And they said, when we started like at the bottom of our like ladders or whatever, like we were starting our careers, we did very different things. And they've basically been on the same teams but both sort of moved up their ladders in parallel. And they said, like, the thing we've noticed is like the things we look at and the things we focus on have like converged. And I think this is one of the things, like, again, for folks who want to go down, I think a non-management path or even a management path, is like this notion of like, you will actually just have your headspace more in business problems and strategic questions and sort of thinking about things and like influencing people. And your headspace will not be in what package am I going to be using? What's the latest, coolest data science technique? And that is often like, I think I found that myself. There are days where I'm like, I just want to sit here and write some code. Can I just do that? Can I just do that? Like, that's all I want to do right now. And I think that's always a challenge for folks, is like, how do I carve out that time? So I would say, like, that's sort of my high level take on it. It is I think it's like one of those like data science unsolved problems. There are many of those, by the way. There's many data science unsolved problems.
Yeah, I think it's not just data science. I think other technical roles also have this sort of like trajectory problem where people don't necessarily want to become a people manager, but that's where the money is, and that's unfortunate. Well, I have some amazing questions that we have got to get to. Amrit, you asked a question that has since blown by in the chat. Would you like to unmute and ask that? I can also put that in the chat so we can see what the question was.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't pay attention to the chat, but
no, that's okay. I just put your question in the chat if you want a reminder.
Sure, yeah. Thank you. So, Mrinal, I just noticed that you mentioned you have worked on causal use cases. I'm just starting out in my career, I would say. I have around, I would say, 4 years of experience, but I still kind of don't understand what is the difference between a use case which requires a causal approach versus an ML or an AI approach, and if that is even a valid question, or like if there's any difference.
It's a very valid question, and it's actually I find this is one of those things that even when I first started thinking about this, I was just like, hey, what is the difference? I think the main thing I would say, like, if I had to, and actually, by the way, I'll say there's a really nice book called The Book of Why, for anyone who's interested.
Oh yeah, Judea Pearl.
Judea Pearl's book, and it's a really I think I can say this in the Data Science Hangout. It's a fun read, right? I wouldn't say that at like a casual social thing, but like, it's a fun read for a data scientist, right? And I think the Book of Why just articulates some of the stuff really well. I think what I would boil this down to is like that classic phrase that data scientists use, which is it causation or correlation, and how we mix up those things. And at one extreme, you have purely observational correlational data. And at the other extreme, you have randomized controlled trials, like, really well-controlled experiments. And then you got like a spectrum. Right? There's like a spectrum of stuff between that. And what I typically have seen is ML models, so predictive models, are more on the correlational side than they're on the causal side. So the question is, like, even if you've built a predictive model, and I have a kind of a silly story about this, which I can tell, which I am probably going to tell. You can have like a predictive model, and then it can do a really good job of prediction. You can plug in the input, and you can actually do a really good job of like determining like what's the value going to be or what's the value. But it's still in some sense correlational. It doesn't tell you whether that input actually caused the thing to happen. And so causal inference starts to get to sort of the questions of like, okay, if we change the input, if we changed some factor, how much would that impact like the result? And there are situations where you just can't, if you want to run an experiment, and you just can't run an experiment, right? Like in public policy, for example, you can't force people to smoke, right? You can't force people to go to a bad school. You just can't force people to do certain things. You can't do unethical things, right? And so that's a sort of a common case where you can't really run the experiment you want. You can't be like, hey, we'll have you guys smoke for 10 years at random, and we'll have you people like not do that. We'll see what happens. And so you say, well, what do you do? So you say, well, you could probably build a model to predict, like, mortality. And sort of a life insurance example, right? Going back to my USA life days. You sort of predict mortality based on like inputs. Like you could look at factors and you could say like, okay, this predicts mortality. And you could include smoking as a factor and see what happens. But then you could also wonder like, well, maybe people who smoke also tend to do other things. And so you could sort of say, well, if I control in my model for these other things, I get a better like estimate of like how much that impacts like mortality or lung cancer rates. So it's often, this causal inference often gets embedded in modeling as controlling for certain covariates or confounding, etc. That's sort of like, it's all sort of on a spectrum. It can be a little bit squishy. The sort of random funny story, which I cannot resist telling, is my very first job, I was looking into a model from a third party. So I can tell the story because it wasn't the company I was working at. It was a third party who shall go unnamed. And we were evaluating the model. We were checking, our job was to check, does the model we are being given actually work? And we were like messing around with the data. And we're like, wow, this model is really good. And it turned out one of the factors that was very predictive was, and I'm not making this up, the size of the second person in the household's t-shirt. You're like,
Wow.
like what? And it's clearly highly correlated to some other factor of the household. Like, who is the second person in the household? It's probably, maybe in the sample, like maybe it's one of the spouses, right? Maybe it's categorized as like head of household versus other person on tax return. Who knows? And so you're like, well, is it just the fact that one gender is taller? Is it the fact that the higher income person, like, what's the real driver? And I've seen other versions of this, right? There's versions of sort of models where you're like, well, zip code. Zip code's a very strong predictor. But zip code, is it causal? Like, can you, and even if it's causal, actually, can you change someone's zip code? Can you do anything about that? So going back to sort of the other aspect of this, which is, I think, a common theme across like a lot of data science is ultimately whether you're data engineering, whether you're building tools, whether you're doing inference, modeling, AI, deep learning, whatever you're doing, you're probably trying to help someone make a better decision with the data they have. Right? Wherever you are in that stack, if you're like, hey, I'm cleaning up the data, why are you cleaning up the data? Because you want someone to have a better signal. Right? So one of the things I think is in that whole thing, whatever it is you end up with, you want it to be actionable. And zip code is one of my favorite examples because I'm like, models that have a strong like dependence on a zip code, when you go to like, okay, what do we do? And I've actually been in a meeting where this happened, where someone's like, so what do I do? Like, I can't change someone's zip code. I can't get them to like move. Like, is that the action here? So I think this is sort of a bit of a double-edged thing, right? There's two sides to it. One is sort of on the technical side, what is causal inference versus what is modeling, and it's sort of correlation versus causation. But then there's the other side, which is when we actually do it, it tends to be about like, are we actually able to action, and do we want to actually make a change in some way? And do we know that change will actually have an impact? Or are we just observing something in the data?
Yeah. This is a
Signal Noise is a
fantastic
great book.
discussion. Yeah, I was just going to ask, like, let me hop in there. Has anybody read it? I have it on my shelf, and I haven't read it yet. Mrinal, you liked it?
I love that. I love that book. It's one of those books I've like my feelings towards the book go like this. So
okay.
But if you average my feelings towards the book, they're net positive.
Net
but
positive.
I do like that
okay.
book.
Yeah, it's great that you mentioned Judea Pearl because I have that book on hold at the library right now. I'm just waiting for it, in a line of other people who are also waiting for it.
That's good, right? Like it's good that there's a line of people wanting to understand the difference between causation and correlation.
Yep, that's a great sign. And also, thank you so much for talking about causation and correlation, because Krista had a question in the chat, which you just completely covered with that. So that's fantastic. And I saw Rachel had a question. Rachel, do you want to hop in?
Sure. Well, Mrinal, I was thinking about like it's rare that we have a company on where so many people have probably interacted with that company. And I was just wondering, would you be able to walk us through an example of something that your teams worked on that we might have been able to interact with or been the end users of? Is there an
Yes.
example like that?
Yes. So I will preface this by saying I will try to tread lightly here. But because everyone has interacted with YouTube, it's actually, so I work at YouTube. And I think because I work at YouTube, the beautiful thing about working at YouTube, when people say like, can you point to something? I'm like, yes, it's highly visible. So I've actually worked on two products at YouTube. One is YouTube TV, which is a TV streaming. Think of it as like cable on YouTube. So that's something I've worked on, and a lot of the work there, has been around like you can sort of it's a paid product, right? Like you pay a subscription. So a lot of the work there has been sort of much more focused on things like how do you grow your subscriber base? How do you get more people into the product? How do you sort of how do you target and incentivize users? So in some sense, a lot of that work is around like growth, thinking about marketing, things like that. Currently, I actually work on on the generative AI side of YouTube, and we have a couple of things that if you live in the US, you can play with on the YouTube Shorts, and you can do some fun stuff with like Gen AI. Um, the, the common thing though, it's really all about like users and user behavior and what they're doing in the product and things like this. Um, a lot of the questions often boil down to questions of, what should we be measuring and what metrics should we be looking at to sort of like drive our product growth, or like what should be our North Star? Like, there's a lot of these questions that sort of come up. So that's kind of what I work on right now. A lot of the actual work involves looking at experiment data and trying to figure out like we ran an experiment. It's an A/B test. I think someone put that in the chat. So we're talking about A/B tests. We ran a lot of A/B tests, and a lot of the questions about, it's interesting. Like, again, sort of the data science aspect there is not so much like how do you set up an experiment or just how do you run an experiment. It's actually helping people make decisions with the experiment data, right? So there's actually I'll plug another book. There's a great book called Randomized. I forgot the exact title. Randomized Control Trials. It's by a few people. I'll find the book. And it's actually all about like big tech and how big tech companies use A/B tests. And it's just it's a great insight. I think that book is a great insight into like what people at Google, Facebook, YouTube, Amazon like think about, and what they do, LinkedIn, like what they're thinking about, what they're doing. But I think it's again that a lot of the value add is, I think, about helping people just interpret the data that they have. So you run an experiment, like, okay, what should we do? The experiment said this. What should we do? There's the flip side of that, which is if you want to do something, what experiment should you run to gain insight into whether or not you should do it? And again, sort of using a sort of silly example, right? There are like experiments that are impossible to run, right? Like you can't run an experiment where you just say, let's just switch off YouTube. Some crazy idea like this, right? Like you can't run an experiment, just like you can't run the experiment where you like force people to smoke. And so there are these interesting problems where, going back to this sort of causal inference aspect, you want to understand what should we do? What change should we make in the product to maybe improve the user experience, make the users happier with the product? And the two questions that come up there are like, well, what does happy mean? How do we measure like whether we've actually done that for our users? And the question of like, well, what should we do to actually test that out? is a lot what a lot of the work involves. I'm going to try to find the book posted in the chat.
Cool. I think we were looking for it, and I'm not sure. It looks like we've narrowed it down to like it could be a couple of them. What was the author? Do you remember?
It's by Ron Kahavi, Diane Tang. I'm going to find it.
Okay,
Oh,
Mrinal's
it is
on the
the
case.
one I shared. If it's Ron Kohavi, I
Oh,
think
It's
it's
Ron
good.
called
Kahavi's book.
Trustworthy Online
Trustworthy.
Controlled Experience. Yeah. Okay.
Not real, not reliable, trustworthy. That's right.
Awesome. I think that one's actually in my Kindle, and I have so many books I haven't read. I'm not alone. Y'all don't judge me. I have a stack. There are so many amazing conversations going on in the chat today. I think I will probably try to go through and grab some of these book recommendations and put them in a LinkedIn post after we talk with Mrinal. So hopefully we can have them in one place. But I wanted to pull in, we have so many amazing questions. I would love to get to some more. There are some Slido questions. One of them was talking about A/B testing. So, or one of them was talking about analyses and experiments. So the question is, how does that knowledge get to PMs and executives and other people? So the institutional data science knowledge sharing, we have all of these analyses and these experiments that we do over the years. What are best practices for getting that into the hands of the people who make the decisions?
I don't know if I should start with a silly story or whether I should start with a serious answer, but
You
I
should
think
absolutely start with a silly story.
so. The silly story is related to one of the roles I had at BlackRock. We spent one of the projects I ended up sort of starting was, it was sort of, this is going to sound really silly. I was like, you know what? We're making this chart in every single deck that we show, every single slide deck that we show our chief risk officer. And everybody makes this chart. It's the same chart. Everyone makes this chart slightly differently. And everyone like has a customized process to make this chart. So I was like, you know what? We should just automate that. We should just have like one way to make this chart. And 2 years after I did this, I remember being at some team event and like this chief risk officer walked up to me and he said, "Are you the librarian?" And I'm like, "I'm sorry, what?" He's like, "Are you the guy who like makes sure the charts are the same and controls which charts end up in the library?" And I'm like, "Actually, yes, I am." And so this, I think, sort of goes to like institutional knowledge, right? Like there's usually this like library of like stuff we know. We know a lot about what's happening in our experiments. We're running lots of these. We have tons of observational data studies. And, you know, if you're working in any large organization, you are going to end up in a silo, right? You are going to become the expert in your product. You have to go deep. You can't know about everything. And then the question becomes like, how do you like share all of this knowledge in a consumable way? I think there's two things I feel work, not perfect, but two things worth thinking about and sort of like communicating. Like, I think this is an aspect, I think there's two parts to the question. Maybe like one part is sort of like, how do you sort of not leak that valuable knowledge, right? The knowledge of the data knowledge of the organization. How do you stop it from like leaking out or like being lost? And then the other part is like, how do you like sort of crystallize that or like make it more succinct and like take it up to like people? I think there's both aspects. I think two things that help with just like preventing like a data, I wouldn't call it data leaking. It's more about like insight leaking. Is one is automation, right? The more time people spend doing bespoke things, inventing their own way of like making a chart, pulling the data, the more time they're spending on that, the less time they're spending on the what is my insight? Because you want to preserve those insights, and then how do I make those insights like presentable? How do I make them digestible? So it's almost like it helps people shift their focus from time spent on the parts that could probably be automated to the parts where like the human really should be involved and like doing more of that like insight seeking and like communication. The other piece I think is actually just like being the librarian, being like, hey, do we have a librarian? Does our data science org actually have a library of knowledge? Like, do we store this in some place? Do we actually have a repository of all of this stuff? Does everyone actually put their code in the same like source control? Like, do we actually have that like structure? So I think that's like sort of systematic things. I think when it comes to like sort of taking things to stakeholders and taking things to like executives, this is actually really, I still find this personally like one of the most challenging things in my role. You know, I've done this for a while. I still find it the part that's the most challenging, which is what you gotta almost figure out like what question do they have? And then you have to sort of know like what do they care about? And it can be really challenging because you've been in this data for so long and you're not in their role. And then you're going to them and they've got all this context that you don't know and you got to figure it out. So I think a lot of it is about just taking a step back and actually trying to think about like your organization the other way around, right? You're like, well, first of all, like, what does my organization do? Like it actually helps to just take a step back and be like, okay, let me restate what my organization does. This is the mission statement. Okay, let me go and actually talk to a product manager or a portfolio manager or whoever my counterpart is and actually ask them, hey, what is the vision deck or document that you created around this product? Like actually go read what they are presenting to their executives, right? So often we're very focused on like, here's my document and how it's going up to executives. Well, what is the executive seeing, or like what's the product manager seeing on their side? Like actually go and like look at it and ask yourself like, well, what are the words they're using and how is it being presented, and just get that feeling of like what's going on their side of the universe. And I think actually just take a step back from the data and being like, let me figure out all the data and let me just like immerse myself in like the other section of the library, if you like. Let me go down to the other part of the library and like read some like fiction or nonfiction or whatever you want to call it. Actually just helps you with some perspective. And then the one other thing I would say is like two things no one's ever complained about. No one's ever complained about a deck having too few bullet points. And no one's ever complained about a meeting ending early. Two complaints I've never heard. I've never heard someone say, I wish you guys had a third bullet point on this slide. Would have been so nice. And so often like, it's a heuristic, but it's like, you could just sort of ask yourself, am I taking away from my presentation? And it's very hard to do as a data scientist because you have poured your life into this project. You have worked hard to get the data. It's really hard to synthesize the data. You have worked hard to clean it up. You have battled with Python environments to figure out how to get scikit-learn to run with this GPU and this stack and whatever. You've done all of that. You've spent your life on this. And then you're like, wait, you just want me to put one bullet point on this slide, but I have so much stuff. And I think that's actually a really hard thing as a data scientist. That is the thing that as data scientists, we just have to learn is sort of in our own best interest, is to just, and this is just an opinion I have, is just to say like, look, yeah, that works there. And people will know that that work is there. And that's part of like what we do. But at the end of the day, it's okay to take away a p-value. It's okay to remove extra data points. It's okay to remove some lines from a chart. Like that's all fine. Like it's okay to just take some of that data away because you really want your point to come across. And it's actually an interesting exercise to ask yourself, why do I have this number on this slide? And so I think this is like still the most challenging, but I still struggle with this. I'm still like, but it took me 4 hours to figure out that number. Like, I know it's only an average, but like it was hard to get that average. Like I really worked for that average. Like, and it's so cool that we know the average. And then you got to do a reality check. You're like, oh, the person I'm talking to really care what this number is. Like, is it really useful? So I would just sort of a couple of thoughts there. So one on the sort of systematic like library. How do you preserve your organizational insights? But then the other part was sort of like as you're sort of presenting insights, just heuristics and sort of personal barriers you have to get over.
Yeah, this is where I will pitch my favorite book that I pitch every time that I possibly can, Subtract by Letty Klotz. I'll put it in the chat. Definitely go read it. If you are a person who would like to know some like scientific backing behind why you should take things away and why subtraction is beneficial and why it's different from just not adding, please go read. It's not a long book. It's amazing. Highly recommend it. All right, we have 8 minutes left. Somehow this hour went by so quickly, Mrinal. I wanted to call Saul in. Saul, are you available to ask? Because you had 2 questions, and I will let you pick whichever one is most important to you to ask. And if you need a reminder of what they were, I can do that.
Yeah, please. I can't remember. Sorry.
Okay, so one was about A/B testing. Like, how do you recommend people get up to speed with causality? And the other one was, how do you network at Google? And I
Oh,
love
yeah,
both of these questions. I love the
Yeah.
networking one.
Yeah, I think Mrinal talked to causality and A/B testing a bit and good book
Great.
recommendation. So I'll go with networking. Yeah, Mrinal, I think just, being at YouTube, sometimes things are confidential, teams are siloed. How do you personally go about networking and connecting with a data analyst on like knowledge sharing? Thank you.
You mean like me personally within my role? Like,
Yeah. Or,
yeah.
If you have best practices too, those help too. Thank you.
I've done a couple of things. So one thing I've actually done is, and again, this is sort of some random stories that I won't get into, but I do force myself in a sort of systematic way to talk to people. And I'm not kidding. One of the methods I used was I literally went and I looked at the org chart and I put people's names in a spreadsheet and I used a random number generator. And I was like, okay, like I'm going to talk to these people this quarter, right? And I just would set up time with them and I would say, hey, like there's no agenda. I just want to get to know you, what you do. It's a coffee chat, whatever, right? At that time it was COVID, so it was a little hard to do like in person, but I was like, sort of virtual coffee, just like I will just randomly pick people and get to know them. And I think, I don't know, it's like the ultimate, like, I don't know, data science approach to me networking is when you randomly select a random sample. But I think it's effective because it sort of allows you to meet people at different levels, on different teams, doing different things. And because you don't really have a selection bias in who you picked, you also go into the conversation I think, more open-minded. You're like, I ran into you on the street. I ran into you somewhere and I'm talking to you. The other thing I try to do is I do the same thing at like organizational level. So like I work in YouTube, I will go network with someone over in like a different part of Google. Like I will, and the way I do that is you can't really do random. I find I will talk to someone I know and I say, hey, do you know someone that I could talk to? And then you sort of use that network to say like, how do I get to know more people? I am very thing about like, if there's an offsite or a summit or a whatever, I'm very thinking about like I want to be there in person. I will try to be there in person because I think that's a very valuable thing. And the one thing I tend to do, and maybe this is advice I shouldn't give, is when I go to conferences and things, I actually don't go to many of the talks. And I know that's sort of bad to say in some ways because like the person who's giving the talk has spent a lot of time preparing that talk and really like poured a lot of time into it. But I find like you got a balance between being in the talk and just the hallway conversations with people. And that sort of applies to like if we have a conference within a company, I will spend half my time in the talk and then half my time we'll just hang out and chat with people. So there's sort of like a mix of like systematic and a network of like, hey, do you know someone? I found that's been fairly effective. One year I did this thing where I actually write this down at the beginning of the year. I actually set personal goals at the beginning of the year, professional personal goals around networking, just as a aside, right? I take this kind of more formally than many people do. Is I don't list it in my official like manager thing. I'm not like I don't go to my boss and say, hey, this is my objective for the year, but like on my own sort of personal like career goals thing, I actually will write like networking. What am I doing this year? One year I did a version of this, which was called meet an engine. Was sort of like meet more engineers or something like this. And there I was like, you know what? I'm going to meet one engineer, so not a data scientist, one engineer every month for this year. That was my goal. And I did like 10. And so I tend to be very like systematic in how I try to set these things up. Because it's one of those things where like I feel like if you're not systematic, at least for me, it just kind of doesn't happen. Just like everything else, if you want to network, you have to set a goal and then you have to try to network. So that's kind of how I manage it. It's how I did it at other companies as well. Like it's sort of, it's nothing specific to Google or YouTube. It's the same approach I took at BlackRock, the same approach I took at USA. It's the same approach I took as an academic, actually, in a sort of a varied way. And by the way, it is this approach that actually got me into data science. The reason I went to someone else's seminar and not my seminar is because I was like, okay, I'm doing a postdoc. What should I do to get to know more people in my department? Go to their colloquia. Pick a colloquium at random. Go to it. so it's something I think you can use in any organization, any community.
Yeah, I will make a pitch for like starting your own data science hangout inside of your organization because we're all here meeting each other, right? Hanging out with no agenda, with just a conversation. And isn't it nice? Yeah. All right, Mrinal, our hour has gone by so fast. We literally have 1 minute left. Do you have anything else to leave us with as far as career advice besides your networking advice? In 30 seconds.
Say, yeah, my 30-second pitch on that is it is a lot. It's called data science. A lot of it is actually about the people. So as much as you spend time on the data, make sure you carve out some time for the people aspect of your role and whatever it is. Networking, communication, slide deck making is a big part of every job I've been in. I don't know about everyone else, but like we making slides, and often it's the part that's not data science, but it is kind of about communicating with people. So I think it's the thing I would say is like that the common aspect of data science that I've seen across all of it is data and people. The science is the part actually that's very varied. It's the data and the people that sort of stays constant, and those challenges and opportunities and the things that are fun and the things that are not so fun are all kind of in the data and the people side. The science, I mean, it's just the fun part where you get to like do all kinds of things.
Yeah, I think the people is a fun part too. Well, thank you so much, Mrinal, for being with us. This conversation was amazing. Everybody have a great day. And please remember that next week, we're going to be joined by John Stanton Geddes, Senior Manager of Analytics, Advanced Analytics Marketing at HP. And it's going to be a great conversation. So I will see you next week. Same time, same place. Have a good one, everybody. Bye.